Novak Djokovic is arguably one of the greatest athletes of all time. Winner of every Grand Slam, record breaker, and one of the most dominant players in sports history. But if you watched him early in his career, you might not even recognize him. Frustrations, broken rackets, breathing problems, crowd doubting him, and media calling him weak. At one point, many believed he would never belong among the greatest players of his generation. So how did this emotionally inconsistent young player become one of the most mentally strong athletes ever? How did he go from losing control to controlling everything? Today we will go through 5 stages he went through in his professional career to become the GOAT. Stage 1 begins long before the trophies, long before the records and the dominance. It begins in a country going through war, sanctions, and uncertainty. Novak Djokovic was born in Serbia in 1987, in the middle of one of the most difficult periods in the region's modern history. While most future champions grow up with the perfect training conditions, Djokovic learned to play tennis during the wartime in his country, practicing in empty swimming pools, training in improvised courts, learning discipline early, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. From the beginning, one thing was obvious. He had talent, extreme flexibility, unusual coordination, and a level of focus rare for a child. By the time he was a teenager, coaches already believed he could become one of the best players in the world. But talent alone is never enough. Because when Djokovic entered professional tennis, he walked into the most difficult era the sport had ever seen. Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. 2 players already dominating the game, considered legends and already controlling every major tournament. And next to them, a young player from Serbia, trying to prove he belongs. At first, it didn't look promising. Djokovic had a skill, but he didn't have control. Matches would slip away, frustration would take over and the rackets would break. His energy would drop. Sometimes he looked unbeatable. Other times he looked like he didn't belong there at all. Commentators started asking questions. Was he strong enough? Was he mentally tough enough? Would his body survive long matches? One of the biggest problems was his breathing. During important matches, Djokovic would struggle physically. He often had to retire because he looked exhausted, out of rhythm and control. Fans noticed, media noticed, his opponents noticed. And in professional sport, once people start doubting you, the pressure only gets worse. By late 2000s, Djokovic was stuck in a strange position. Too good to be ignored, too inconsistent to dominate. He had a talent to become number 1, but something was holding him back. And soon, that problem would become impossible to ignore. By the time Djokovic reached the top level of professional tennis, the sport was already under control of 2 players. Roger Federer had turned elegance into domination. Rafael Nadal had turned intensity into his biggest weapon. For years, every important tournament seemed to end the same way. One of them lifting the trophy. Breaking into that world required more than talent. It required stability, endurance, and control under pressure. This is where Djokovic struggled. He could beat anyone on a good day, but the problem was that not every day was good. Matches that started perfectly often ended with frustration. His level would drop without warning. His breathing became irregular. His body sometimes looked like it couldn't keep up with the demands of long matches. Several times, he was forced to retire mid-match. At the highest level of sport, that creates a reputation very quickly. Players started to believe they only needed to extend the matches. Commentators began to question whether his physical condition was strong enough for Grand Slam tennis. And fans noticed something else: emotions. Too much of it. When things went wrong, he reacted. Rackets hitting the ground, arguments with the umpires, visible frustration after missed points. Instead of looking like a future champion, he sometimes looked like a player fighting against his own limits. At that time, Federer looked untouchable. Nadal looked unstoppable. Djokovic looked uncertain. He was good enough to reach the biggest matches, but not reliable to win them consistently. And the deeper he went into tournaments, the more the pressure exposed his weaknesses. Something wasn't working. Not his technique or his talent. Something deeper. His body wasn't recovering the way it should. His energy wasn't lasting. His focus wasn't staying where it needed to be. For a while, it seemed like this would simply be his role. Always close and never fully there. But this period would become the turning point. Because instead of accepting the limits, Djokovic started asking a different question. What if the problem was not in his tennis, but in his body? At some point, repeating the same effort and getting the same results forced a different kind of thinking. For Novak Djokovic, that moment came after years of being close to the top, but never fully in control. He wasn't losing because of lack of skill. He wasn't losing because of lack of work. Something else was draining his energy, breaking his rhythm and affecting his performance when it mattered the most. Instead of training harder, he started looking deeper. Around that time, Novak Djokovic began working with a Serbian doctor who approached performance from a different angle. Not just technique, not just fitness, but the body as a system. Recovery, nutrition, breathing, and stress. During testing, they discovered something unexpected. His body was reacting badly to certain foods, especially gluten. At the time, this sounded almost unbelievable. In professional tennis, diet was not considered a deciding factor, but Djokovic decided to try. He completely changed the way he ate. No gluten, cleaner food, more control over what enters his body. The result didn't come overnight, but slowly. His energy stopped dropping during matches. His breathing became more stable and his recovery improved. For the first time, he could stay at the same level from the first to the last point. And that was only the beginning. He started adding other things that most athletes ignore. Stretching routines, yoga and Pilates, meditation and breathing exercises. Not to look different, but to feel different. Instead of fighting pressure, he learned to stay calm inside it. Instead of reacting, he started observing. Instead of forcing control, he built it. Match by match, his body became more stable. Point by point, his mind became quieter. And when those two things finally connected, something changed. Not just in his results, but in the way he played. For the first time in his career, Novak Djokovic didn't look like a player trying to win. He looked like a player who knew he could. The real test of change is not how it feels in training. It's what happens under pressure. After months of adjusting his diet, changing his routines, and rebuilding his body from inside, Djokovic entered the new season with something he never had before: stability. At first, the difference was small. Long matches didn't exhaust him the same way. His breathing stayed steady. His focus didn't disappear in the crucial moments. But as the tournaments went on, something unusual started to happen. He wasn't just winning. He was beating the best players in the world. Again and again and again. Matches that used to slip away, he now controlled. Rallies that once drained his energy, he now finished stronger than his opponents. Against Federer, he stayed calm. Against Nadal, he stayed patient. Against everyone else, he looked one step ahead. This wasn't the same player who used to struggle physically. This wasn't the same player who reacted with frustration. There was less emotions, less panic, and less wasted energy. His movement became lighter, his recovery faster, and his concentration sharper. The change was so obvious that even his opponents noticed it. The season turned into one of the most dominant runs tennis has ever seen. For the first time, the question was no longer, does Djokovic belong at the top? Now the question was, how do you stop him? What made this transformation different was not just better tennis, it was control. Everything that once looked like a weakness had become his advantage. And this was the moment when Novak stopped chasing greatness and started defining it. Reaching the top is difficult. Staying there is something else entirely. In any sport, most players have a peak, a few great seasons, a short period of dominance. And then, slowly, the body changes. The mind gets tired and the results fade. But for Djokovic, the story didn't follow that pattern. Years passed. New players arrived. The game became faster and stronger. And yet, he stayed. Not just competing, but winning. What separated him from the rest was no longer talent. At this level, everyone has talent. The difference was control. Every detail mattered. Sleep, breathing, stretching, meditation, cold therapy, mobility work, and mental preparation. Things that once sounded unusual became part of his daily routine. Not because they were popular, but because they worked. On the court, the effect was obvious. In the longest matches, he looked fresh. In the most stressful moments, he looked calm. When the pressure was highest, his level stayed the same. While others reacted, he stayed still. While others rushed, he waited. While others broke, he adapted. This kind of control doesn't come from talent. It comes from years of understanding your own body, your own mind, and your own limits. Or in his case, learning how to move those limits. Records started to fall, grand slams. weeks at number 1, titles across different surfaces. Not because he was the strongest, not because he was the fastest, but because he became the most complete. The player who once struggled to finish matches became the player who never faded. The player who once chased the top became the one everyone was chasing. And that is the final stage. Not talent, not hard work, not luck. Control. When people talk about greatness, they usually talk about talent. But stories like this show something different. Talent may decide how far you can go in the beginning. It doesn't decide how long you can stay at the top. What makes Novak's journey unusual is not just the numbers of titles he won. It's how many times he had to rebuild himself to keep winning. Most players reach a level and stay the same. He kept changing. When his body failed, he changed the way he ate. When his energy dropped, he changed the way he recovered. When pressure broke his focus, he trained his mind. Step by step, he removed weaknesses most people never even notice. And that is why his story feels different, because he refused to stay the same. In modern sport, the difference between good and great is often invisible. It's in routines nobody sees, habits nobody talks about, decisions that don't look important until years later. Control over what you eat, how you react, control over what you do every day even when nobody is watching. This is the stage most people never reach. And maybe that's why dominance like this looks so rare. Not because it's impossible, but because almost nobody is willing to change that much. From the outside, it looks like talent. From the inside, it's discipline. And that may be the reason why Novak Djokovic didn't just become the great, he stayed there.